Hello everyone, Squid of Baconator here, and welcome to today's video. Now for this guest show month, Bob's show has instructed us to review any movie that he has reviewed that we have a conflicting opinion on. And for me, I will be taking a look at Cars 2. A movie that has not really been pretty well received. It's been pretty negatively received ever since its release in 2011. But Bob Show has made a video on this movie saying that he loves it, and he doesn't really get where the negative opinions are coming from. So I figured I think I'll take a look at this movie myself, give my 2 cents on it, and maybe argue 1 or 2 of Bob Show's opinions later on. Now with all that said, let's get started with the review.
First, we need to talk about the premise of this movie. Now, Cars 2 takes a pretty weird turn from the first movie. This franchise goes from a simple story about an egotistical race car driver learning to be more humble to a little bit more of a complicated story, and also being a spy film. Now, when I first heard this premise years ago, I thought it was pretty stupid. This really didn't seem to be a good direction for this franchise, and it doesn't help that the main character from the first movie is now pretty much a secondary character, and has taken the back seat. Now, I'm not saying this was lazily put together or anything. From what I've heard, John Lasseter, the main person behind this movie, really liked spy films and wanted to make this movie. So I can tell there is at least some effort being put into this movie. And that leads me to my one big positive that I have to give to this movie, the animation. This is Pixar we're talking about, so the animation in Cars 2 is really good. Everything from the scenery you see in all the places they visit, to the racing scenes and how much high energy is put into them. And even the action scenes are very well put together. So I can tell there is effort being put into this film, at least in terms of animation. But while there are those positive things that can be said about this movie, there are still some negative points I have to say about those things. But to lead into that, let me ask you a question. Was this sequel really necessary? Was this a movie that really needed to be made? Well, in my eyes, no, it was not necessary. The first movie ended on a good note. There wasn't really too much in that movie that really warranted a sequel. And at the box office, it was one of Pixar's weakest films, at least with how much money it made. No, this movie was made for one big thing: toy sales. Before Cars 2 came out, the original Cars made $8 billion in toy sales. Who knew Pixar stumbled upon marketing genius when they made the first movie? You just take a Hot Wheel, put a face on it, and then BAM! You're raking in the dough. While John Lasseter did want to make this film, it's pretty obvious the other people at Pixar greenlit it because of how much toys they could sell off of it, which is not really the best thing that you can do with a movie.
Also, just because a film puts effort into it doesn't automatically mean it's going to be good. Just because you try doesn't automatically mean you're going to succeed. And secondly, just because a movie has good animation doesn't mean the movie is automatically going to be good. The animation is just one part of making a good animated movie. The animation can't carry the film alone.
Now, my first main gripe with Cars 2 is with the humor and my overall enjoyment of the movie. And that mainly comes from Mater, the main source of the comedy of this film. How much you like Mater and his humor in this movie is going to be the big point on whether or not you love it or hate it. As for me, I find Mater to be pretty unfunny in this film. Now, the biggest problem with Mater being the main character is a problem that shows like Planet Sheen and The Cleveland Show have, and that is with putting the comic relief in the spotlight as the main character. The comic relief is meant to be a foil to the main character. They're only meant to be secondary or side characters, and that is where they work best. This is also because they aren't as interesting as the main character, and when you put them in the main spotlight, you won't be as invested in them. And also another problem is that their shtick will get very old and very annoying fast because they end up using the same joke over and over again with very little variety. Not only does this humor become predictable, it becomes unfunny and annoying. And sadly, Mater falls into this category. I only remember laughing at like 1 or 2 jokes from him, and since he's the main source of comedy for the movie, that is a really big problem. It's a shame because I really did like him in the first movie, and even in Cars 3. But sadly, his jokes got old very fast, and I ended up disliking him in this movie. As for how much I enjoyed the story and everything else in the film, honestly, nothing really stood out as that interesting, so I was either annoyed by Mater's humor, or just bored when everything else was happening. So in the end, Cars 2 is not a very enjoyable movie. Now let's look at the story. For this, I'm gonna look at some highlights and important parts of the story, and pick those apart and say how I feel on them, instead of just going through the entire movie nostalgia critic style, which a lot of people already do. There are some parts of the movie, like the first 10 minutes, in which I don't really have anything to say on, and I don't feel like padding out the review by just saying that these things happen. I'm only going to talk about things that I actually have something to say on. But if you want the short version of what I feel about the story, I don't like it. The first problems with the story come up when we are first introduced to Axelrod, and when he shows us All, this new alternative fuel for cars. This brings up many questions. For one, do they really need to worry about oil and global warming and stuff like that? Is the car's very existence a detriment on the planet? Do they really need to worry about this type of stuff? This environmental stuff doesn't really make sense in this world. Mainly since oil is pretty much water to these guys, so that makes things even more confusing. Anyways, Axelrod is holding a World Grand Prix to show how good All is. Lightning was invited, but he turned it down because he wanted to take time off, and he only agreed to it in the end because of the cliche of having the idiot force their friend to compete. Now the next problem pops up when they reach Tokyo. There are a couple scenes where Lightning and Mater are just seeing the sights. This is completely pointless. It doesn't do anything to move the story forward or anything. This is just filler. And this movie has a good amount of filler in it. After that, the gang gets to a party, which is kicking off the events of the World Grand Prix. And there are a couple problems that pop up through this section, so let's go over them. First, Mater. All the jokes in this section pretty much boiled down to Mater being an idiot and embarrassing Lightning. Even though Lightning told Mater to be on his best behavior, Mater still acts like Mater. Seriously, none of these jokes end up being funny. They mostly just come off as repetitive and annoying. It gets to the point where Mater thinks he leaks oil, and he ends up going to the bathroom, and this is how Mater and the spies end up meeting. So the spies are set to meet with an American agent, but because of reasons, Finn can't meet up with him, so Holly has to meet up with the agent, despite her not knowing what this guy looks like. Gee, I wonder how this will go. I'm sure it will be hilarious. So the American spy ended up getting found out, so he ends up passing the data he was holding to Mater, which is also how the spies were tracking where the American spy was, which leads to Holly thinking that Mater is the spy.
Whoa, didn't see that coming.
But because Mater is an idiot, when Holly tells Mater that they need to meet up later, Mater thinks that he has a date with her.
Ha ha ha, very funny. Can't you tell how entertained I am?
And now we get to the first race. I'll go into more detail about why the racing parts of the film don't really work later on, but I'll just say this right now. The racing portions of the film have so much focus put on them at the beginning, but they become less and less important as the movie goes on, and these details don't really add up to anything. So the spies keep thinking that all the stupid stuff Mater does is just spy stuff, and that he's playing an idiot as his cover, but really Mater is just stupid. Okay, here's the problem with this. If Mater was just doing this as a part of his cover, then why was he acting like an idiot in front of you guys when it wasn't necessary? This makes it seem like the spies are kinda dumb themselves, not realizing this. Throughout the first race, Mater is on a headset giving tips to Lightning, but one of the spies ends up hacking his headset and telling him to get out of the pits, and while they are communicating and doing their thing, this screws with Lightning and he ends up losing the race. During this time, we also get an action scene with Finn McMissile, but I don't really have anything to say on that. So Lightning ends up snapping at Mater for making him lose the race, which causes Mater to try and go back home. Now this part has me kinda confused. Am I supposed to be mad at Lightning for snapping at Mater? Am I supposed to feel sad for Mater even though he didn't really know what he was doing and he ends up thinking that he was just following a voice in his head? How am I supposed to feel about all of this? These scenes weren't really that well executed. Also, after Mater finally meets Finn McMissile, the sadness from the last scene pretty much just gets forgotten, so we can tell more Mater's an idiot jokes that aren't even that funny to begin with. This was a very awkward shift in tone. And then not long after that, we get yet another action scene that I don't really care about. While the action scenes are well animated, I just don't really care about watching them. They come off as a little boring to me. Anyways, they managed to get away and the three of them are now on a plane analyzing the picture that Mater had.
Yes, okay, right. But whose engine is this, Mater?
Well, it's kind of hard to tell from this picture, ain't it?
But you're the one who took it.
Holly?
Oh, right. Yes, of course. A good agent gets what he can, then gets out before he's killed.
Shouldn't you be asking follow-up questions to get more clues or information out of the situation? At least do that instead of shutting them down. It just feels pretty insulting. Anyways, the spies don't really see anything with the picture that could help them, but Mater notices the bolts in the picture.
Well done, Mater. I would never have seen that.
You would have never seen them, but they're all over the picture. With how many of them are in there, you would think your attention would be drawn to them, especially when you're a spy and you should notice these little details. You're really not that smart, are you? Anyways, they meet up with the criminal who sold these parts, which ends up giving them a lead to where they need to go next, which is also the location of the second race. On their way to that location, not much happens other than setting Mater's disguise up. Alright, this next plan of theirs involves Mater having to disguise himself as this tow truck. But what about Mater's voice? Are you gonna disguise it, have him not talk, or...
Why, this place looks like it's made out of gold.
And then Mater blows his cover and he gets killed. The end! Okay, that's not really how it ends. The movie keeps going. Whatever, let's just get to the bigger problems when the big boss is talking over video call to the professor and all the lackeys. Okay, one more small problem. Why is he using a video call? If he wanted to disguise himself better, why didn't he just use a regular telephone call? The first thing the boss does is get everyone angry because they're all lemons and older car models, and they don't get parts made for them anymore. In this world, this doesn't make sense because this would be like not making things to help keep old people alive because they're old. Also, why can't these guys just convert themselves into fully electrical cars like Axelrod did? These guys aren't poor, so there's not really any excuses they can have. Okay, here's another problem. These guys are using the races to get everybody angry at all in all, so that these guys can make more money off of oil. What's the problem? All the cars of the world already run off oil, so you just be continuing business with other people who are already selling oil. These motivations don't really make too much sense. Anyways, the two spies end up getting captured. Mater ends up blowing his cover and then he ends up getting captured. And before we can see what happens to them, we have to sit through a dream sequence where the movie tries to make you feel sorry for Mater for making you laugh at him. Okay, Pixar, you really shouldn't make us feel guilty for what you lead us to do. You try to make us laugh at him through 2 movies and through several shorts, but all of a sudden you're trying to make us feel sorry for Mater? That just isn't right. And then we see that the 3 of them are trapped inside London's Big Ben, while the whole scheme is going on in London. Why you wouldn't send them halfway across the world to someplace that they couldn't get to here in time? I have no idea. Now the bad guys try to kill Lightning, but the beam doesn't work. No, it's not because he went around a building and got out of range, which is what it should have been. Instead, they go for an excuse later on that just feels like Pixar saying, we can't kill Lightning. Anyways, now the bad guys tell Mater that they're going with a backup plan of putting a bomb in Lightning's pit area. But that was just a trick to get Mater to go to the pits. The bomb is actually on him. He communicated this well with the rest of the group, but he fails to do so with Lightning, and it pretty much just leads to failed comedy and annoyance. So they manage to get out of range of the detonator, because of course they do, and the movie pretty much loses all suspense, with this bomb now not going off. After that happens, Finn McMissile manages to capture the professor, and the secondary characters from the first movie helped capture the other lackeys. This is pretty much the only use they really got out of this movie. And then they find out from the professor the only way to deactivate the bomb is for the person who made it to say deactivate, and Mater ends up figuring out who the guy is after Luigi mentions the bolts that are on it. This leads to Mater and Lightning going to the Queen of England to say who the guy is.
Okay, it's him. What?
So the guy who made All in All has been trying to sabotage it this whole time? Why? Okay, before I get any further, I should say this outcome was kind of predictable. I knew that Axelrod would end up being the bad guy, even though how much the logic here explaining that he's the bad guy doesn't really make much sense. But there isn't any other character that has been introduced that could be the big bad guy, unless the movie wanted to pull some random character out of its ass. Okay, so the first part of Mater's logic is pointing to the bolts that fasten the bomb to his engine, which leads to Mater's logic being that since Axelrod leaked oil at the party at the beginning of the movie, means that he used the same bolts that are used to fasten the bomb to your engine. That doesn't really make any sense. But the question is, how do you know that he used these bolts?
But Sir Axelrod created the race, Mater. Why would he want to hurt anyone?
To make All in All look bad, so everybody go back to using oil.
Okay, so if he wanted to make All in All look bad, then why didn't he say something that could have made it look bad earlier? Why was he defending it? Why didn't he say something like the scientists found a problem with All in All?
Mater, he created all in all.
Yeah, but what if he found that huge oil field just as the world was trying to find something else?
Mater, if that's the case, then he could sell both oil and all in all. Axelrod is the only distributor of all in all in the world. So if he found an alternative to put oil out of business, why would he be looking for more oil?
What if he came up with all in all just to make alternative fuel look bad?
If that's the case, why would he be pushing it? And also, why would he be bad-talking oil at the same time? Mater, very little of anything that you just said makes sense. And all of it points to that if we follow your theory, Axelrod is one person who couldn't have done all of this.
But because the plot says so, Mater has to be right, and Axelrod deactivates the bomb.
The engine from the photo.
It's a perfect match.
Hold it. Can we go back to an earlier scene?
It was standard in 7 models over a 12-year period. At least 35,000 cars were made with this.
So not only is the car from the photo a completely different color from Axelrod, but this engine type is very common among a lot of different cars. Clearly he's the culprit.
Anyways, after Axelrod gets arrested, not too much happens. Mater gets knighted. They try to explain how lightning didn't get blown up earlier in the last race, in a way that is kind of stupid, that doesn't really make sense, when they could have used a pretty decent excuse of lightning going around the corner too quick before they had the chance, which is what I'm sure a lot of people thought when they first saw the movie. And that is the story of Cars 2, and wow, I dislike this a lot more than I first thought. Not only did I not really enjoy the story at all, but there are so many things that make it really flawed. Sorry, Guestsheaux, but I really can't see how you like this so much. Okay, now let's talk about the racing parts of the film. These pretty much just serve as the thing that gets the characters to move from one place to the next. The racing portions of the film take up a lot of screen time, especially at the beginning. It makes it seem like this is going to be a big part of the film. They put a lot of focus on it, introducing characters, and showing McQueen, a generic racing rival, try to compete to win the 3 races. But what's the problem? Well, they aren't given a good conclusion at all. Hell, they even address part of it like this.
Who's winning the race?
Yeah, towards the end of the movie, they pretty much just forget about finishing up the race or giving it a good conclusion, and that line just helps show how pointless the racing segments really were. It feels like the racing parts of the film just served to fill time because the spy parts of the film didn't have enough material to fill the entire runtime. Really, if you don't have enough material to work with the entire film, then don't make a movie. The only real reason it's there is to move characters along and to give Lightning some screen time. If the racing segments were removed, then Lightning would have nothing to do in this movie. Lightning McQueen, the main character of the last film, and pretty much the mascot of the Cars franchise, is reduced to a side character role and he barely does anything. The 2 things Lightning does for the movie are 1. Snap at Mater, which causes him to leave the group and really get the spy plot going, and 2, which leads into my next negative point for the movie, he helps enforce the moral, which ends up being, well, kinda confused.
Look, nobody takes me seriously. I know that now. This ain't Radiator Springs.
Yes, it is. Look, you're yourself in Radiator Springs. Be yourself here. And if people aren't taking you seriously, then they need to change.
So the moral is that you should be yourself wherever you are, and if people don't like that or don't take you seriously, then they need to change?
It's everyday, bro. It's a chapter.
But seriously, while I understand what they're trying to do with this be yourself moral, it ended up being pretty poorly executed, and with what they're trying to do, I have some problems with it. For example,
I brought my friend Mater along on the trip, and I told him he needed to act different, that we weren't in Radiator Springs.
This Mater is a close friend?
He's my best friend.
Then why would you ask him to be someone else?
oh, I don't know, maybe because they're in a different country? Again, I get what they're trying to say, but it doesn't really work with these situations. You're supposed to act differently when the situation demands it. Would you act the same way around friends as you would at your workplace? Or in the case of Cars 2, would you act the same way in two different countries? No, you don't. And saying that if people don't take you seriously, then they need to change, doesn't really help this movie's case out. Overall, Cars 2 is a pretty mediocre movie. While it does have one or two good things about it, like the animation, I don't really see any other good things coming from this movie. From just a pretty mediocre story, a stupid premise, a poorly executed moral, characters that range from bland to underused to annoying, and overall just being pretty unoriginal, unfunny. I cannot recommend you guys watch this movie. In my opinion, you should just go from the original Cars straight to Cars 3. Both of those movies are much better. And they don't even mention anything from this film in Cars 3, probably because of the negative backlash from this movie. But that is just my opinion on this movie, and now I would like to hear what you guys think of this film. Do you love it like Bob's show? Do you think it's really funny, really entertaining, the animation's great, and so on? Or do you dislike it like me? You think it's pretty bland, unfunny, annoying? I would like to know what you guys think in the comments. Now with all that said, I'm Squid of Baconator, and I'll see you guys some other time.